So part of what you're going to be doing in this workshop involves a seed file, which really running the seed file is going to help you create your models. And again, it's good to get, either doing it through tests or doing it through seeding your data. It's great to get your data access layers down, get your Mongoose models down before you end up creating your Express application. Because again, you could end up doing, seeding your database or testing it out from a command line. It's going to be a lot faster than having to go in and start clicking through pages to see that your data structures were set up correctly. So in your workshop, there's going to be a link to this seed file. And one of the things you could do, if you haven't done this before, is that I have an empty directory set up for this project, and I'm going to say git.clone. And so if you do this with a gist, and since I want it to go into a folder called seed, I'm just going to say seed. And if I go and open up Vim, what I want to do is take a look at this, because it could feel a little bit magical. And I want to talk about what's going on here and a couple of different changes that we're going to make. So one of the things that you're seeing here is that we're pulling in this models from this models folder. Now, I've mentioned this before. I want to do this a little bit differently here, so that again, I like to be able to connect to the database here. So what I would rather do is say require. And I'm going to actually go up. I'm in my seed folder right now. I'm going to go up to DB. Okay, this is where I'd be able to connect to my database, although I'm actually not really going to have to do it for the seed file, and I'll explain why. My models, similar to what you saw in the last video, are going to be hanging off this. Okay, so let's just take a look at this file. One of the things that we're seeing here, this is going to be the nested item, and that's why the place is getting pulled out here. And so we're going to create these hotels. A hotel is composed of a name, a nested document, which is a place, number of stars, amenities, and that's about it. And we could scroll down. I think there's 15 hotels, and there's a bunch of restaurants. A restaurant is composed of a name, a nested document for a place, and let's actually be clear about this, because this is something that's different than what I would like you to do. It used to be with Mongoose that you couldn't do a nested schema. You had to do an array of nested schemas, and that's the way that the Mongoose was as of fairly recently. You don't have to do that anymore, so I sort of misspoke. When you look here, this is going to be, place would be a nested collection of documents where there's only one document, and that document is going to conform to our place schema. But you no longer actually have to do a collection. So that's one thing that I wanted to bring up. And again, this is something that changed fairly recently. You've got activities. Activities have a name. Again, right now they have a nested collection of documents. We're going to make it so that you just have one place, because that's really all you need. And you also have an age range. So at this point, this is just data. We're not really doing anything with this data. But the way that this is going to work is that we're going to open up our connection to our database. And this is something that I had spoke about before, where here we're actually going through the process of dropping a database. And sometimes this is necessary because, as I mentioned before, when you end up putting constraints on collections, even if you end up wiping out the collections, the constraints are still sitting in your in Mongoose in the form of, if it's a unique constraint, it's sitting in Mongo in the form of an index. And it's not that easy to go and wipe it out. So here, the way that you end up wiping it out is you end up dropping the database. So we're going to have a connection that we're going to end up opening. Once we end up opening it, we're going to drop the database. We're going to console log something out. And what happens here is that we've got our data. And so Promise gives us the ability to map. And the way that this ends up reading is that we're going to map over our keys of data. So our keys would be, if you look up here, our keys are going to be hotel, restaurant, and activity. Those are going to be our keys, and that's what promise.map is going to end up looping over that data. And for each of those keys, and that key is going to correspond to a model name, what it's going to do is then it's going to do another mapping, and it's going to basically take that data that's in the model. So it would end up taking all the hotels, all the restaurants, all the activities, and for each of those, it's going to end up creating it. So it's going to, each of these, if this is going to work properly, right, our models collection is going to have a Mongoose model for hotel. It's going to have one for restaurant. It's going to have to have one for activity. So we're basically creating, if we went through this, we'd be creating promises for all of our hotels. We'd be creating promises for the creation of all of our restaurants. We'd be creating promises for each of our activities, and we're aggregating all of them together. And that's how our data is going to end up getting created. Now, right now, this is not going to work at all, but it's not going to take all that much to get it to work. I want to simplify things a little bit. So I'm going to end up getting rid of a bunch of data here. And I'm going to do it by commenting it out. Let's just see how easy this is going to be to do. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to make this my only hotel. Here are my hotels. So I'm going to comment this out. There's a little bit of a drag to do. And I'm also not going to have any restaurants, just to keep this simple. And I'm also not going to have any activities. So I know this looks a little bit weird here, but it's just going to ignore this. And here my data has one key of hotel, and it's only got one object here. And so one thing that I do want to point out here is that you really have no reason to set up your schema with these documents. You could actually set it up so that each hotel has not a collection of places, because that doesn't make sense. Hotel could only really be in one place. The only reason, again, that it was a collection is that Mongoose didn't give you the ability of setting up a structure like this. If you tried to do it, it would say, you have a problem here, this has to be a collection. You don't need to do that anymore. So what I want to do is implement this. And the way that I'm going to implement it, I'm going to go in here. Right within here, I'm going to connect to my database. So I'm going to say mongoose connect, and I'll go in here, and I'm going to call this MongoDB, and let's call this localhost, and we'll call this TP1601F. DB. Okay. Now, if I was to go and run this, and I went ahead and I typed in node, now I've got to go into this database. So if I look over here, this is going to be node seed / Tripplanner seed.js. Right, this is not going to work because it can't find this DB object here. And I should also end up installing what I need to install. So I'm going to do npm install mongoose. I know I need mongoose. I know I need bluebird. I'm not testing at the moment, so I'm a little bit less concerned with that. I should probably save those as well. So what I could do here is go back here, and let's actually add our DB index.js. So this is where we're going to be able to connect and where we'll have all of our indexes. Now again, if I try to run this, right, I'll get an error because not only do I not have any models, but I don't have any places, obviously, either, right? I'm not exporting anything from this. So you could start to build this out. This is pretty simple. There's only going to be two models that we end up needing. We're going to end up needing our places, and we're going to need our hotels. Those are the two models that we'll end up needing here. And again, the other modification was just based on the fact that Mongoose ended up changing. So what I'm actually going to do here is one other thing that I find pretty helpful to do is that in my package.json file, just so I don't have to keep on doing this, I'm going to create a little task for myself. And this is also in the workshop later on, so I wanted you to see it now. So I could go in here and I could say seed, and this is going to be a node, and I'm going to end up running seed / Tripplanner seed.js. And probably wants to be double quotes here. Okay. And if I want to run that, the way that I could run that, again, I'll get the same error. Instead of actually having to run this all out, I can't just say npm seed because seed is not really recognized like start is, but you could put any task you want here, and by using the word run, seed, I should get the same error here, right? Cannot read place of undefined. So let's create this pretty quick. And again, it's a couple of minor modifications that we made here. Let's go into our index file. We know we're going to need Mongoose. And we also know that we're going to have a schema, which will be place schema. And so we'll say Mongoose schema. This is going to be our nested schema. And for now, the only thing that I'm going to put in here is I'm going to put in, I know there's a street in there, which is a string. I'll leave it as an exercise for you guys to put the rest of the properties in here. And again, you could run seed a bunch of times and then look at your database. You could seed things and then run some tests, however you really want to do it. But what I'm going to do here is say place equals mongoose model place, and this is going to be my place schema. So this is going to be my inner schema. Same way, basically the equivalent of what we did with bar. And now I'm going to say hotel schema equals mongoose schema. And here, I know I have a name, which is going to be a string. And again, the workshop says that this has to be a collection, but it doesn't. That's the change that was made in a recent version of Mongoose. But my place is really going to conform to a place schema. It's going to be a nested document. And now I could say hotel equals mongoose model hotel schema. Now I've got my two models, so I'm going to say module.exports. Now again, if I'm running my application, you know that I like to put my connection object in here. We're not really using it for the seed file, so you don't have to do it for the seed file, but if you're going to write any tests, you would probably want to do it. So I'm just going to do this so you sort of remember you should probably have a way of connecting to the database and using our Bluebird library and that sort of thing. But my models are going to be my place, and my hotel. And again, in that seed file, it's going to create all these objects. It's going to need the place model because it is using the place model here, models place. We could have also, done something like new hotel here, but that's just not the way that this was written. And again, it's written totally fine. These are objects that have a nested document here. Again, we only have, when you end up doing this, you're going to have to go in here, and what I'm doing for this first place, you're going to want to do for the other ones as well. Because again, it doesn't need to be a collection. If it's treated as a collection, you always have to do a little bit more work on it, which I would rather you not have to do. So if I end up doing this, now if I go back and I run this, dropped old data, now inserting data. If I go back to my Mongo, So I ended up calling this was TP 1601 FDB. Use TP 1601 FDB. Show collections. Here are my hotels. Again, no places because they're nested here. db.hotels.find. And again, you see this nested object. And here's our place. The only thing that I don't see in our place is our street. So here's our place schema. And let's just take a look at our seed file here. So it's not street, it's address. So let's modify that. And again, you could build this out a little bit at a time. So this is not street, this is address. And literally, I could just go back and forth, and this is not a bad way to get this set up. You could eventually run some tests, but for now, you could really work off this seed file. And now if I go back over here, and I do this yet again, I'll see here's my address. And again, you can build this out a little bit at a time, right? Just to sort of beat a dead horse a little bit. We also know that we're going to have a number of stars. So if I went over here and I said num stars is a number, and I went back in and I seed it again, and I go over here and I run this again, you'll see the number of stars as well. So I wanted you to see the nested document within the context of the project that we were looking at. And again, you know, the change that you're going to make here, that you can make, and I think it makes sense to make, is that if you look at your models here, you can see this is actually a little bit outdated. Each place is actually an array containing one place schema. Mongoose does not allow embedding schemas except inside of arrays. That's something that had changed. So you could actually do a search, and you'll probably see some of this stuff on Stack Overflow. But for now, in our app, this doesn't need to be an array of place schemas. It can just be a place schema, which will end up making our lives a little bit easier. So I think this is going to give you sort of enough information. You could get started with the models. It's a big part of the workshop. And you could start with that and then move on to actually creating the Express part of it and bringing in your styles and bringing in your third-party Google API library until you end up building out this workshop.